Hey guys, Luis D from PhoneArena here. When the Sony Xperia Z3 Plus launched, we couldn't help but wonder, has Sony's strategy of updating its flagship smartphones 2 times a year finally gotten the best of them? We won't spoil the question just yet, but we will let our review give you the verdict, along with our quick opinion on whether it's worth it to upgrade from the Xperia Z3 to the Xperia Z3 Plus. Although the Xperia Z3 Plus is virtually identical to its predecessor, you will be impressed by its look and feel. It has the same elegant metal and glass build that's among the best in class, but quite predictable at this point. When it comes to the differences between the two, we think the omission of the magnetic charging port is welcome, for it was neither particularly useful nor elegant looking. Moreover, on the Xperia Z3, the charging port was covered with a flap, while the one on the Z3 Plus is wired in the open, but still waterproof. That's unquestionably better design, but the camera shutter button on the Z3 was slightly less wobbly and nicer to press. Still, these are very minor gripes to have with a design as sleek and understated as Sony's. A more serious complaint would be the complete finger magnet of a glass used for the handset's front and back panel, and while we're at it, the volume buttons feel quite anemic, lacking width and travel. But on the side of good news, the Xperia Z3 Plus is thinner and lighter than its predecessor, although it still makes for a big smartphone. There are more subtle, almost imperceptible nuances on the surface that make the Xperia Z3 Plus's build seem ever so slightly tighter. The frame is more flush with the body, the front-facing speakers now occupy the very ends of the top and bottom bezels, and the microphone has been moved to the frame's top side. But consider the repositioning of the micro SD and SIM slot to the left, and this concludes the list of obvious differences between this and last year's model. On the dual SIM version of the device, the combined micro SD and SIM card slot houses one micro SD card and up to 2 nano SIM cards simultaneously. Usually, dual SIM handsets limit users to having either 2 SIM cards or 1 SIM card and 1 micro SD card at the same time. So Sony has to be commended for this bit of clever engineering. When it comes to the display, the Sony Xperia Z3 Plus doesn't offer anything new over its predecessor. Once again, there's a 5.2-inch 1080p resolution IPS LCD panel with 441 pixels per inch pixel density. This is a great display on many levels, especially considering its extraordinarily high maximum brightness. But the Z3 Plus display has an overwhelmingly cold color temperature, which results in a noticeable bluish tint. Plus, there are some more inaccuracies found, such as the generally oversaturated red and green shades, not to mention the yellow nuances drifting towards green and purple colors inching towards blue. Furthermore, shades of grey appear darker than they really are, which makes for a rather undynamic image with poor contrast. And due to the overly bluish color balance, greys actually present themselves as a sort of a dark blue. Not good, unless you really like blue tinted images for some reason. On the side of viewing angles, the Xperia Z3 Plus gives off significant deteriorations in maximum and minimum brightness levels when viewed at a 45-degree angle. However, color error shifts are kept quite manageable. This behavior is typical of IPS LCD displays and can be observed in other high-end smartphones that use the technology, such as the LG G4. Overall, this is a great screen for outdoor and bedtime viewing, not so much for fans of color accuracy and dynamics. As interfaces go, the Sony Xperia Z3 Plus ships with Android 5.0.2 Lollipop running Sony's custom interface on top. This is a no-frills interface styled after stock Android with Sony's custom apps, icons and widgets inconspicuously integrated into the picture. However, there seem to be too many widgets occupying each home screen by default, which contributes to increased clutter and occasional stutters in the user interface. Otherwise, the Xperia UI is very simple and intuitive. Home screen editing is a breeze with easy options to add, remove or change pages, widgets, apps, wallpapers and themes. The multitasking key brings up the current apps in memory in the Lollipop card-based swipe format, as well as the ever-useful small apps suite, which accomplishes basic multitasking by means of apps contained in small, resizable floating windows. Other than the slight stutter caused by the many widgets, it's hard to find significant flaws within the Xperia UI, but the sterile and subdued feel of a near-stock Android experience might not be for everyone. For what the Xperia UI achieves in terms of sheer usability, it certainly lacks in emotional pull. To each their own, we say. Where specs are concerned, the Sony Xperia Z3 Plus works on the back of Qualcomm's latest high-end silicon, the Snapdragon 810, which is paired with 3GB of LPDDR4 RAM. Now, Sony clearly had to go an extra mile in taming Qualcomm's chipset. Due to aggressive throttling, its Antutu score is below that of the LG G4, which has a lower-class Snapdragon 808 chip. That's a surprising turnout considering the Z3 Plus also has faster LPDDR4 RAM. Moreover, the Xperia Z3 Plus is almost always noticeably hot. Not enough to feel uncomfortable, but enough to act as an impromptu hand warmer. Internal operating temperatures upwards of 50 degrees Celsius are not uncommon during periods of sustained load. Thankfully, graphics performance is very good. Thanks to the reasonable 1080p screen resolution and Qualcomm's powerful Adreno graphics unit, the Xperia Z3 Plus is fast in graphics benchmarks, which is reflected in generally smooth playback of graphically intense games. The Xperia Z3 Plus camera package remains seemingly unchanged from last year, when Sony equipped the Xperia Z3 with a 20.7MP Exmor RS main camera sensor and a 25mm G-Lens optics system. With this setup, the Sony Xperia Z3 could pull off some sharp-looking photos with its rear cam. So it comes as no surprise then that the Xperia Z3 Plus is a capable camera phone as well. The camera app remains the same as well, a feature-rich piece of work with an intuitive user interface and a giant selection of shooting modes. Of course, the star of the show is Sony's superior auto mode, which gives it a very good try at estimating the best camera settings for the scene you're currently shooting. It is still great for producing natural colors, and its white balance guesswork is quite reliable. Then again, as with most smartphone cameras, this one does its best in broad daylight. Problem weather tends to confuse the sensor into snapping overexposed photos or into activating HDR mode in times where this would turn out to be pretty meaningless. Still, the occasional quirk doesn't get in the way of a generally solid shooting experience. We're quite satisfied with the amount of detail captured, and the subtle sweetening of colors that may occur in some shots will leave you pleased. Well, most of the time. Indoor photos are fairly good in terms of lighting and white balance, but the noise reduction algorithm is quite heavy-handed and produces very filtered-looking results. However, the LED flash does a very good job with scenes shot indoors in complete darkness. The artificial lighting is fairly even across the scene and doesn't generate overly bluish or yellowish hues to take away from the natural look of things. The same can be said for low-light photography with the Xperia Z3 Plus in general. While we're discussing the camera app, we must give a passing mention to the arsenal of shooting modes at your disposal. If you've ever used a high-end Xperia handset, you know what's coming for you. Adorably gimmicky AR dinosaurs, artsy background defocus, slow-mo video, YouTube streaming, multi-camera, face mode and plenty more downloadable modes. You won't be using these often, but when you do, you're going to have lots of fun, especially where the front camera is concerned, as the 5MP front cam is a fantastic selfie snapper and the built-in filters can do everything. However, there's no way of turning skin smoothing off, which may annoy male users. As for video recording, we deem the results possible, with a few caveats. Curiously, the 1080p 30fps daylight video we shot suffered from weird crackling in the audio track, but thankfully this odd bug does not appear all the time. However, the image sharpness definitely leaves a lot to be desired. We also shot a 4K 30fps video, which didn't look spectacular, but it did improve the sharpness somewhat. In manual mode, the Z3 Plus has the ability to shoot 1080p 60fps video at the expense of image quality and the predictable soap opera type of motion effect. Overall, the Z3 Plus is a reliable but not a standout camcorder. Where connectivity is concerned, you'll be having zero concerns thanks to the elaborate modem built within the Snapdragon 810 chip. The Xperia Z3 Plus supports every wireless connectivity standard under the sun, including Category 6 LTE internet. It also has Google Chrome as the default browser, which is a familiar territory to most Android users at this point. Browsing is generally speedy and problem-free thanks to those up-to-date internals. Multimedia-wise, the Xperia Z3 Plus performs predictably well, thanks to its big display and nice stereo speakers. The suite of Sony multimedia apps, such as the famous Walkman music player, makes for a pleasant, user-centric multimedia experience. The album app in particular is one of the finer takes on a gallery app, with a rich interface and plenty of editing and sharing options to spare. Meanwhile, the Walkman player boasts a suite of sound enhancements such as DCE-HX, virtual surround sound, clear audio plus, an equalizer and a dynamic normalizer. But these tweaks are nice to have rather than essential. Same goes for the X-Reality and Super Vivid display modes optimized for viewing photos and video content. Despite having redesigned front speakers, the Z3 Plus plays exactly as loud as its predecessor at 74 dB of output. Headphone output, however, is still low compared to what other smartphones in the same price range are pulling off. When call quality comes in, the earpiece is loud enough to compete with noisy environments, but the aggressive noise cancellation algorithms give you a filtered nasal quality to your voice. And the loudspeaker itself sounds somewhat thin and muffled. We'd say the Sony Xperia Z3 Plus is an average performer in terms of call quality. Now, where battery life is concerned, the Sony Xperia Z3 Plus comes with a smaller battery unit of a 2930 mAh capacity. The Z3 Plus only lasted 7 hours and 15 minutes of constant on-screen use in our battery test. This is a decent result among today's high-end flagships, but it's the lowest of any Xperia Z series smartphone that we've had the pleasure of testing. On the upside, the Xperia Z3 Plus is much faster to charge than its older sibling, which took almost 4 hours to fill up. The Z3 Plus clocks in at 189 minutes for a 0 to 100% charge using the bundled charger. There is Qualcomm fast charging support in the handset, but the bundled charger isn't of the fast kind. So, what's the verdict? Well, it looks like Sony's strategy finally got the best of them, because the Sony Xperia Z3 Plus is essentially last year's phone with a more powerful chip that's also more power hungry, which results in worse battery life. Moreover, save for the fine 5-megapixel front camera and the LTE Category 6 support, there are no meaningful user experience improvements whatsoever. Xperia Z3 owners have no compelling reason to upgrade to the Z3 Plus. This is Luis from PhoneArena. I hope you enjoyed our review. Come back for more.